All right, let's talk to John about all this. Ron DeSantis announces it's the least surprising thing in the world. Joining me now, my friend John Phillips of the great John Phillips Show on the great KABC in Los Angeles. John, okay, you're not surprised. I'm not surprised. You and I have had this conversation a million times. Ron DeSantis gets in. Clearly, Trump's the most popular Republican in America today, but primaries are different things, different states, different times, different organizational structures to them. What do you think about it?
Well, I think it's all going to depend on which candidate shows up. I know that you, like me, am a fan of 1980s professional wrestling. And you think of Hulk Hogan. When he entered the ring to go after Andre the Giant to slam him, he wore that yellow bandana, that yellow and red bandana. That became an iconic part of Hulk Hogan's image. Yet when you saw him in the lawsuit, he was going after Gucker, he had the black bandana. It's almost like a more formal bandana. And depending on where he is, the bandana will signify which one's showing up, which version of Hulk Hogan will be there. And you look at Ron DeSantis, and Ron DeSantis is a guy who's been a lot of different things over the years. You go back to his time in the House of Representatives, he was one of the Freedom Caucus guys where he cared about things like entitlements and reining in the administrative state and those sorts of things. When he became a candidate for governor, he became, in part because of the Trump endorsement, an America First kind of guy. And that was what we saw all through COVID when he rejected the pleas from the Anthony Fauci's of the world to shut everything down, the schools, the economy, get rid of the separation of powers. He refused to do that, and he became that guy. But since COVID has gone away, he's become more of a culture warrior kind of candidate where he's gone to war with Disney and he spends a lot of time dealing with the drag queens and those sorts of things. And I'm curious to see how he frames himself as a candidate, which version of Ron DeSantis shows up. From my point of view, the most successful way for him to promote himself in a Republican primary is to be that middle version, be that America First guy. He's the guy that would have fired Fauci had he been in the White House. He's the guy that would have fired Deborah Birx. He's the guy that would have fired Rochelle Walensky. And Donald Trump is very vulnerable on those subjects. And I also am curious to see which version of Donald Trump shows up. Because of late, every interview I see of him, he's still talking about the 2020 election like it happened yesterday. I don't think that's the winning ticket for 2024. You have to move on. You have to talk about what's relevant. If I were Donald Trump, I would go back to 2016 and run on the subject of immigration. The border is more broken now than it was in 2016. And because the cartels have the unlimited ability to ship in fentanyl to all parts of the country, that's what the driving force is for homelessness. That's the driving force for crime. That's the driving force for people who die much sooner than they probably should, which is afflicting the Middle West the same way that it's afflicting the major American cities. If I'm Donald Trump, I spike the football and say, I was right. Had they given me my wall, we wouldn't have to deal with all of this. But he's got to stop relitigating the 2020 election if he's going to do that.
Okay, I don't disagree with that. Relitigating the 2020 election is something that I love to do when I'm with my hardcore friends. But as we've seen time after time after time, voters do not want to hear it. Voters in general do not want to look back. They want to look forward. They want to be inspired by what is to come. Now, here's something that fascinates me about this. Trump, I can see it clear as day, so I'm sure you can. He's very clearly trying to get away from cultural issues. He's made more than one comment recently. I don't think we should deal with abortion. I want to get away from that. I see this as Trump trying to make this race about immigration and foreign policy and things like that, because that's where his bread is buttered. And DeSantis will try to be the culture guy. My question is, who wins in that scenario? I don't think you can walk away from immigration if you're Ron DeSantis. That's something people care about. But if you're Donald Trump, I don't think you can walk away from issues like the culture war stuff either. Right?
Well, from my point of view, I see the culture war issues being a distraction for Trump. What I, as a voter, am interested in is making sure that the border is safe and secure. I'm also interested in figuring out how he's going to make this term, or how he would make this term, different from the last one in terms of the personnel that he hires. You look at all these awful people. He either didn't fire them if he inherited them, or he hired truly awful people. And he acts like he's not the one that hired Christopher Wray. He acts like he's not the one who hired John Bolton. He acts like he's not the one who hired that shrew on The View. He acts like they just hatched out of an egg and suddenly they were there and he had to deal with all of these lunatics. Candidate Trump needs to explain how this term would be different, how he would figure out a way to get more Rick Grinnells and fewer Christopher Wrays. That to me is more important to him, for him to identify that he will be a good candidate and a good president, than getting involved in the culture war subjects that I think you and I both know he doesn't particularly care about anyway.
No, he doesn't care about them, but at the same time, and I'm not passing a judgment on this. I agree with what you just said, but Donald Trump very clearly will not admit he is wrong, like the lockdowns and vaccines and things like that. He's still out there saying he did it perfectly, even though that's not what the base wants to hear. I personally, and I don't think he can bring himself to do this, I think there would be a huge appetite in the GOP base if he would step up and say, yeah, look, I should have, Christopher Wray was bad. Dr. Fauci sucked. Bill Barr sucked. When we get in there next time, we're going to hire way better people because I made some mistakes last time. I'm not naive. I don't think that's coming, but I think that would be very appealing to people. Or am I naive and it wouldn't be appealing to people at all?
No, I think you're 100% right. And I think that reining in the administrative state is something that he's going to have to do. You cannot have an out-of-control FBI. You cannot have an out-of-control Department of Health and Human Services. You have to make sure that these organizations do and perform what the mission is, and they don't go beyond that and get involved in politics and try to dictate the public policy of the country. He put out that list of judges that he would appoint to the Supreme Court if elected, that was provided to him by the Federalist Society. I would love to see a candidate Trump come out with a list of people who he would be considering, or at least would promise to appoint from, for these various cabinet positions. So we know on day one, if he gets in there, this guy is going to clean out the FBI, and this one's going to clean out the EPA, and this one's going to clean out the CIA. And we're going to make sure that if they are not behind the core mission of the organization, if they want to do other things, there is not space for them in a second Trump administration. I think he almost has to lay it out in black and white like that.
Let's address the elephant in the room before I let you go, John, the legal troubles. Because this is going to be a primary unlike anything we've ever seen. And yeah, all this stuff is unjust, but none of that changes things. Donald Trump is in serious legal trouble in New York City. He's in serious legal trouble in Washington, D.C. That might be where he's in the most trouble. Probably Georgia as well. We're talking indictments. One of them has already happened. Or maybe convictions, trials and convictions. In fact, I think that's probably the likely scenario. This is going to be an insane primary. How does he deal with it? How does DeSantis deal with it?
Well, one of the things that seems to be true about Donald Trump, and has been true for a long time, is that he brings out the worst impulses in his opponents. I don't know why. I don't know how it consistently happens, but it always happens. And his political opponents, particularly those who are supposed to play it straight, like the DA in New York and that jury foreman in Georgia, they hate him so much, and they essentially regard him as a criminal and work backwards from that. So they don't look at the facts and let the facts lead them to whatever the conclusion is. They start with the conclusion and work backwards, because they hate him so much and are so convinced that he's a criminal that they don't believe he's entitled to any kind of fairness. And when that is what is put out time and time and time again, I don't think anyone who is inclined to vote for Donald Trump or open to voting for Donald Trump, I don't think they see it for anything other than what it is, which is a partisan witch hunt. And certainly that's the spin that he puts on it too. But every time they put some juror on television who looks like she just snorted the left field line at Anaheim Stadium, or they put that district attorney, that crooked Soros district attorney up in New York on television, people can fundamentally identify the unfairness of what's going on. And if his opponents continue to behave like that, I don't think it hurts him politically that it would hurt another candidate if they did play it straight, and that's just where it led them.
Yeah. John, appreciate you, man. Come back soon.
Thanks for having me.
It's going to be a wild primary. It's going to be a wild primary. I'm excited for it. I know everyone else is dreading it, but that's because you still have hope. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It's going to be a wild primary, though. All right, I have great news. If you enjoyed that, I have a YouTube channel you can subscribe to. Whatever I do, it'll be right there on YouTube, so go subscribe today.